welcome to this segment of Mountain Sledder Garage. This episode we're going to be working on our Polaris Axis, and we're going to be talking about track tension and track alignment. Now these are two important things to check on your sled if you don't want premature wear on your track and your high facts and some of your other components. So something you ought to be checking throughout the year. If you get a brand new sled, something you probably ought to check right from the dealer, because some dealers will set it, some won't. And then as your track wears in, and your track is going to get some stretch on a brand new sled, and you're going to have to adjust your track tension periodically throughout the season on a new sled. Even on a used sled, you want to check it every once in a while, because what you can have, if it comes too loose, you can get a condition called ratcheting, where your track actually, the drivers on your track spin on your track and don't turn your track because they come disengaged. We're going to show you that here in just a second, how that works. But today we're going to be focused on the Polaris, very similar for the other brands. But first let's talk about drivers, the things that turn your track. We'll give you a little bit more in-depth detail on drivers, different kinds of drivers and how they work to engage your track and turn your track. So we're going to go over to the table here, and we're going to go show you through some different drivers, the ones Polaris uses and some aftermarket ones. All right, so let's start with the Polaris factory drivers. All drivers are going to come on, this is a drive shaft off an Axis with the belt drive system. The chain crate equipped sleds have a different driver than the belt drive equipped sleds. And this is off a belt drive equipped sled. It doesn't really matter which one you have, you just have to recognize there are two different Polarises used on the Axis over the years. And this is actually an aftermarket driver. So these are the stock drivers I've pulled off. Polaris does it kind of different than the other two brands. They have these two drivers on the outside like this, and this one driver in the middle. So what we call this is called an internal drive sprocket, meaning it drives the nubs on the inside of your track. This is called an external drive sprocket, where it drives through the holes in your track. And we're going to go down here to this track that I pulled off this sled, and we're going to kind of show you how that works. Okay, so this is the Polaris track, has these internal holes here. This is the external drive. This drives off here. As your drive shaft turns, these external drive sprockets engage the track here and turn the track. That's how the external sprockets work. The internal sprockets drive off these rubber nubs here. They engage the track like that and turn the track like this. So that's the two types of drives. Most sleds have two drive sprockets, internal and external. Used to be many years ago when we didn't have high horsepower sleds, all we had was this kind of sprocket, and then the aftermarket started making external drive sprockets. Everyone started changing too, so the manufacturers kind of followed adding external drive sprockets onto theirs. Now this track is particularly problematic because you can see where the external drive sprocket would grip on here. The rubber can deform and cause your sprocket here to slip, especially when it's wet. It can slip very badly. It's called ratcheting. It can cause kind of a grinding, very disturbing noise. And when it happens, it's usually under severe load, like at the top of a climb or something. When your track and engine under severe load, this will actually, instead of engaging here, it'll spin out of the holes and spin. And you can see this track has been damaged here, been kind of ripping this apart. You can see all the way down here where this is ripped apart here. And this external drive sprocket's been tearing this track apart from track slipping. And that's the kind of track damage you can get from your track not being too tight. The problem with the Polaris track is sometimes you just can't tighten this thing enough for the sprockets not to slip on here, because they're only gripping on rubber, and rubber can deform, where all the other brands have a drive sprocket like this that drives off the metal track clips here, and those aren't going to deform like the rubber does, and it's going to give you a better grip on the track. So let's go and look at the different kind of drive sprockets. Okay, like I said, these three are the sprockets that come stock on your Polaris. This is kind of a different form of aftermarket sprocket that Avid Products makes. This can replace those without any other modifications. It just has a bigger external drive sprocket that can grip a little bit better. If you have a high horsepower sled, probably don't want this, because this can slip pretty easily too, but if you have a normally aspirated sled, this isn't a bad way to go. So if you want to upgrade this to something that drives off your track clips, Avid makes these drive sprockets that have these external drives that drive through the holes on your track clips and engage your track clips. And these, if your track's adjusted accordingly, pretty much never slip. It's really a good upgrade to do on a Polaris. If you're going to add these sprockets, you have to do some other things to your suspension. And then there's another sprocket. This is another internal drive sprocket. And you see this one, this sprocket has this six-sided shape for the drive shaft to go through. This is the other kind of Polaris sprocket with the splines on it like this. You can see that. Go down to the sled and we'll show you how to adjust your track tension, your track alignment. And this is what we're going to look at. This is out of the owner's manual for the Polaris Axys. Kind of shows you some of the measurements and things. When we measure the track tension on this, we're going to be measuring from the center of the idler shaft back here. That's the shaft that goes through your idler wheels in the back. We're going to measure forward 16 centimeters from the center there here. You can make a mark if you want. You can just put something on it if you want, but that's what we're going to do. That's where we're going to measure our downforce on our track. There's two other things we'll show you need to be aware of. There's the adjustment screw here and the adjustment lock nut here. We'll show you all those things. Also in your Polaris owner's manual is this. Shows you for the Polaris Axys and RMK. The slack adjustment we want to measure is 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch in sag when you hold 10 pounds of pressure on your track. And this is from 16th head of the rear idler shaft. A lot of times I've found if you go to 3/4 of an inch, you're still going to maybe get some track slippage or track ratcheting. So some people suggest maybe doing this maybe 1/2 inch. That's a pretty tight track. Some people call the Axys track, you have to tighten it so much it's banjo string tight, and it really is. To get this thing not to ratchet on your track, you really have to have it tight, and that's a pretty much 5/8 to 3/4 inches, kind of the bare minimum you want this to be, and probably more like 1/2 inch is where you really want it to be, and check it throughout the year to make sure your track isn't stretching, that's going out of control. Or another thing we used to do in the olden days, we used to not really check this like this. We would just, if our track ratcheted, we tighten a little, and we'd ride it for a while, and if it ratcheted again, we'd tighten a little more, and we just keep tightening in increments until it stopped ratcheting. But as I showed you in the Polaris track, if you do that, it starts tearing your track apart. So you really want to avoid your track ratcheting, especially on your Polaris, because it doesn't start tearing that center drive nub or rubber apart on your track. All right, let's go adjust this track. Okay, now we're down here with our track. We're going to adjust it. Now we have 3 things we need to be aware of on this that we need to loosen in order to adjust our track. And you already see my track, it's fairly tight, but it still probably needs a little bit of adjustment. So one thing we want to do, this is the rear idler shaft. We want to loosen this bolt. It is a 16mm bolt, and so loosen it. Now you don't have to worry about holding on to the other side because the other side is fixed. On some snowmobiles, it's got a bolt on both sides, so if you turn one side, it will spin the other side, and it's hard to loosen. But on the Polaris, has a really good job of designing this because it's fixed on one side. You can just loosen it and not worry about the other side spinning like some of the older sleds. The other thing we need to loosen, the bolt here that tightens and loosens the track tension itself, has a lock nut on it right here. This is also 16mm, so you got to get in here with an open end wrench and loosen that. And you can kind of spin it off a little bit. Now I've already loosened the other side just so it makes this a little bit easier. And then the last thing, when we adjust the track, this screw right here, the tension adjustment screw, there's one on each side. There's one here and one over here. They have a 10mm head on the end, which is right there. That's what we're going to be adjusting. We're going to measure 16 inches from here forward, which is about right here at the crest of this triangle shaped hole. So I'm just going to put a little piece of blue tape here, painter's tape, so we know where 16 inches is. Now you can use anything. I like using a fish scale. Just see, now we can pull 10 pounds of pressure on this. I'll hook it in the middle and we'll kind of see where we're at, and I'll kind of pull a steady. That's 10 pounds. Now if we measure, we're at about, so I'm pulling 10 pounds. We're at about 5/8 of an inch, which isn't bad. So I'm going to tension this a little bit just because this is a fairly new track and I know it's going to stretch a little bit on the first ride or two. So I go in here, I'm going to turn each of these maybe a 1/2 turn. 1, 2 1/2 turns. And on this one, you want to do them equal so your track tensions on both sides equally. 1, 2. Now the next thing we have to do is we're going to remeasure this and just kind of see where we got. So we're going to put our gauge on here again, pull down to 10 pounds, and measure it with our ruler. There's 10 pounds. And we're a little bit tighter than we were before, which I'm pretty happy with. We'll check this throughout the season and see. The track tension is only one part of this. As you can see, you have 2 wheels here, and there's 2 screws that adjust this from one side to another. If you tighten one side more than the other, it pushes back on this one and pushes the track from this right side over to the left side, so your track will be out of alignment. So the next thing we have to do is adjust the track alignment. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. So one, you can look through the windows and you wanted to see where the rail fits inside of this window, and compare this side to this side. And you can see both rails are almost directly in the center of the track window. So my track alignment's probably really close. And when you're adjusting this, what you want to do is start up your sled, spin the track 2 or 3 times, let it sit, and then come back here and adjust this again just to try and get it where it's supposed to be. The other way I've seen people do it, you can get a ruler and measure from the edge of the track to the edge of the rail and center it that way. Or some people center it off measuring down here from their track to the edge of the Hyfax. So there's a number of different ways you can measure that. Track alignment, track tension, 2 important things. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about track alignment here because it's not quite as intuitive as track tension. Track tension is pretty easy to understand. It's just how much sag there is in your track when your track's up off the ground, and it'll help the drivers not spin on the track when you're accelerating. Track alignment, however, is not something people talk about as much, and track alignment is what you want is your track centered right in the center of your rails like this. You don't want it off to this side, you don't want it off to that side. It can cause undue wear because your metal track clips are supposed to run right underneath your Hyfax, which is the plastic part on the bottom of this. And if your track's over to one side too far to one side or the other, what it can cause undue wear on your Hyfax and on your track. So you want your track aligned so it's right in the center right here. And how we do that is with the 2 adjustment bolts that push our axle shaft back and tighten it or loosen it. That's how we adjust not only our track tension, but also our track alignment. So how we do that, if our track is over too far this way, we're going to say it's like clear over here. It can't really get there, but we'll just, for the sake of this, we're going to like overemphasize how far we are. What we need to do, we need to push the track from this side over this way so it's more centered. So what we want to do, the bolt on this side, if we tighten that, it's going to push this axle back. I'm going to over-exaggerate this a little bit. So it's going to push the axle back this way. If we push the axle this way, it's going to tilt the wheel this way just a teeny bit, and that's going to push the track from here over to here a little bit. And it might go too far. That's why we take those measurements that we showed you on each side just to make sure the track is either in the center of the windows where the rails come through here, or when we're measuring from here to here or from here to here from the track to the rail, it's the same on both sides. So that's track alignment. And we can either tighten this side to move this, or if we loosen this side, this one's going to go forward. And so you can either loosen or tighten, and you kind of play with it a little bit to understand which motion is going to move the track in which direction. So when you do one motion, after you're done moving it, you want to start your engine, spin your track a little bit so it moves around 3 or 4 times, and then come to a stop and come back here and remeasure. And if you need to make a little bit more adjustment, you can adjust either one of these adjustment screws and center your track where it's supposed to be so the alignment is set. So that's track alignment. Now once everything's set, you have your track alignment set, your track tension set, we want to go back in, make sure that you tighten your lock nuts here with your 16mm wrench. The idler bolt here has a specific torque to it if you like to torque things and not just eyeball it with your hand to tighten. This is supposed to go to 55 foot-pounds, so you can torque that down with your torque wrench, and then we're all done. We're ready to go. Your alignment set, your track tension set, and we're going to have a good ride out on the powder today.